Okay.
You're live.
Whoa. Welcome, everybody, back to House General and Housing.
Thank you.
And it is Thursday, still, April 17th. We're having a continued walkthrough of S-127, which is the bill that is the Senate bill on housing that is the analog to our housing bill, which they possess. And we have had a walkthrough before, but we are having additional help from Cameron Wood, our august legislative counsel, on particularly focusing on the testimony we received yesterday. We had two people who testified, one Michael Gahn, and also Charlie Baker from the Regional Planning Commissions. And Charlie submitted written testimony, which had a number of elements to it, one of which Michael testified to, which was the question of whether we should or should not or should alter the provision number 4 in the application criteria for the bond bank money. And that's on page 10 of S-127.
As introduced.
As introduced, right? It's under the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. Cameron, identify yourself and tell us what you think about everything under the sun.
Be here a while. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. Morning. I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to share my screen, pull up the side by side that we've been looking at, and then we'll kind of discuss some of the conversation that you all had yesterday. So for your side by side as the as passed version, this is page 9, and highlighted is subdivision is F4 that we had discussed last time we did the walkthrough. And as you can see, it's really the distinction between the House version that you all passed and the Senate version that you now have possession of. And as you can see, this is for the application criteria that the bond bank and Department of Housing Community Development will be looking at, reviewing applications for funding under the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. And as you can see, the language in the Senate version is the application criteria will look at the ranking of the community on the Vermont Department of Finance and Management Vermont Community Index.
Oh, yeah.
And so, my comments previously have been, you may want to have Department of Finance and Management or Bond Bank, Michael Gahn, someone come in to talk to you about, what is the Vermont Community Index and, what is their anticipated use of said index in reviewing applications. I've done a little bit of digging on my own to try to figure out what the Vermont Community Index is. My understanding of the testimony yesterday from Mr. Gahn was to keep it in, but to add something to the effect of or similar future index. I can't, you would need to hear from Department of Finance and Management as far as what their intended continued use of said index is. My understanding is it was snapshot in time. I don't know to what extent, recently, this is a recent invention, if you will. And so I don't know to what extent they're intending to continue to update, analyze that information, etc. So presumably it could change, or they could scrap it and not, use it if it becomes outdated. I don't know that there's anything in statute requiring them to continue to use it into perpetuity. My understanding, what I've been able to track down is it was in session law in 2023, directing them to create this index, for the purpose of, at the beginning of that subsection, and I can pull the language up if you all would like to review it, but, it's, intended to expand technical and administrative assistance to municipalities with high need. But again, I don't know that they're going to have, the Agency of Administration would have ongoing funding to continue to maintain and update this index, again, into perpetuity. I don't know. So anyway, I am, the request from Michael Gahn, I think is relatively straightforward. So it's really, I am here to facilitate any discussion you all would like to have about whether you want to see changes to the language or whether you want to remove it or to what extent you would like to keep it.
Charlie Baker also testified at some length, or just for a bit about this, in which he said, he clarified that it was used for ARPA funding, help communities prepare for ARPA funding. He clarified that, like myself, he had real doubts as to whether the algorithm, the formula really produced a list that was made sense. And I finally asked him, if you might remember, are you saying you would prefer to take it out? And he said, yes. So we have one piece of testimony that says I think Michael didn't care very much, but if you're going to leave it in, make it better. And we have one piece of evidence saying, take it out. Joe.
Correct me if I'm wrong in my recollection of this, but I believe number one, this section has to do with infrastructure projects,
Correct.
water being one. I believe Michael Gahn stated that in doing water expansion or whatever projects at the moment, the system actually seems to work pretty well.
Which system?
The community index.
Community index.
He said it seems to work pretty well in the projects that they're doing it currently. So that being said, I think that, the program they'd be running, the guy running it says it seems to work for the programmer running. I would probably lean that way. But I do think we should have the originators, the agency that originated this in to ask the exact question of, are we improving this over time? Is this a one-off? What's the plan for the future of this? But yeah, I would say that maybe putting the successor index, or however you want to word it, seems appropriate.
I would want to know that if we base the piece of legislation on that index, that it's going to be defined and updated on a regular basis.
And
I mean, I think it would be comfortable. More comfortable.
You have,
just to piggyback on that, I think, and if we were to keep it into to indicate that it's an optional, check in with it as like a way to arrive at, guide you. One element of the guidance that you will seek as to how to
I
operate.
need to say in legalese with a grain of salt.
It is one of five.
yeah,
things that I look
and
at.
there or.
Yeah.
It doesn't say, it just says take all this into account, right? Yeah, that's why it's not,
Well, it
It's not-
says shall be evaluated using the following criteria,
yeah,
and it
it's one
doesn't
of
say.
five criteria, right?
Can I ask? It's not or. I don't
It's not
think.
or, it's and.
It's and it's shall. It's not maybe,
We could change that.
yeah.
Well, so real quick, a few things. For starters, the language under subdivision F, for awareness. Here on the bottom of this page. It's in addition to any criteria developed, so this will not be an exhaustive list, and you're giving the bond bank. There are sections in here that require them to work with Department of Housing and Community Development to develop the guidelines, so it's, essentially gonna be those two entities. Will be developing guidelines, and based on this language, you're giving them a pretty broad leeway to develop guidelines that they will use. So what I read this section is doing is saying, in addition to whatever guidelines you're going to develop, you will evaluate shall, it's a must. It's not a permissive. You shall evaluate them on these criteria. A few other pieces. I will comment, most of these things, as I was kind of reviewing this language again, most of these pieces, I think it's relatively clear about what the expected evaluation will result. So what I mean by that is whether there's a direct connection to proposed or in progress housing development. Well, based on the other language in the section, it's pretty clear that it's going to be evaluated and given higher scoring, if you will, if there is a in progress housing development, right? The next one, whether the project is an expansion of an existing system, that's a yes or no. And based on the section, if it's a yes, it's expanding something that's already existing, it's probably going to be given a higher priority. It says the ranking of the community, and it doesn't really specify, okay, if you're higher ranked on the community index, I believe that means that you have less capacity to administer these things. And so does that mean that you're given priority because you're higher ranked? Or is it because you're lower ranked on the index and therefore presumably you have more capacity to manage similar projects? Maybe you're given higher priority there. Presumably the bond bank and DHCD would make that determination based on what you have written. So I'm just saying, when you say with a grain of salt, I would say the bond bank and DHCD have pretty broad discretion here. They need to develop guidelines. The guidelines should be more explicit about what they're looking at. You're just saying here in this section that you shall evaluate these things, and they have to then figure out what that evaluation would mean and how they're going to make determinations on which projects to fund and which projects not to fund.
How would people feel if we said in 4, we made 2 changes? We said consideration of the ranking of the community on the Vermont Department of Finance or a successor index or ranking methodology.
Can I ask a question?
I'm just throwing that out. Yeah,
So Charlie mentioned, through the application process, he's recommending there be a letter written from the RPC.
right.
Would that fall into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Where would that fall into this language?
My understanding is he wants that to go in the section above, subsection above E. So in the
Gotcha.
application,
Okay,
you have to provide that letter.
okay,
So then presumably that would be kind of a, if you haven't provided a letter, then you haven't submitted an application and you're not going to be considered.
He did have another proposal too.
He did have a proposal of adding, under the 2, it's whether the project is an expansion of an existing
Yes.
system. The language that was provided to you all in written testimony says to add whether the project is a new system. I leave it to you all to determine whether or not that's appropriate. I would then see them as somewhat contradictory.
Well, he's basically, I think what he's saying, this is, we're moving on to the next piece. He's saying under 2,
So we're discussing.
I know, right, but if you go back to the statute itself,
Act 2.
yeah. F2, he's just making the point that F2 is kind of badly drafted. A little, inadvertent, it's been an inadvertent mistake, I think he's saying. There's really 2 issues. One is whether it's an expansion of existing system. That's one issue. The second is it close to a designated area? And he's saying, unfortunately, the close to a designated area has been dumped into, is it an expansion of an existing system? And it shouldn't be, because it doesn't matter whether it's new or existing, it's whether it's close to an area. So if we did what Charlie wanted, the simplest way to do it would be to add a 3 and separate these 2 phrases. That is, one would say whether the project is an expansion of an existing system. The next would say, is the project proximate to a designated area? It would just divide them. I think it's sort of a technical idea there.
I'd like to do what Charlie wanted.
there. I mean, it's just two different issues. It's not technical, but
yeah,
it's,
I guess I'm just reading it the way that was earlier for the previous one, it just falls in that same bucket, so I'm not sure how you change this, which is whether the project is an expansion of an existing system. Does that mean you get priority or downgrade?
Yeah.
You just have to factor in whether it is and which way you're gonna count it on your scale.
I don't mind giving him that discretion. It's a factor he has to take into account.
I think that's why I would say the same with the ranking system, like you're taking, it's part of a whole and you're kind of
Yeah.
Right,
expecting their expertise to get through all of that.
right. What are other members of the committee have opinions on these two items?
So are we,
We're gonna have.
so are we
Yeah.
trying to change, like, she'll be evaluated, so in line two, like, should it say, so project application will be evaluated more favorably? And then we have to,
You know,
I would say just leave it the way it is,
it
yeah.
doesn't really say whether any is favorable or unfavorable.
Yeah.
And that what one is might influence how you see the other factors. So
Right.
if you've got a town with no capacity, but for whatever reason, the finance is complete, the project is ready to go, that may not matter that much. It may be
it
unlikely.
just seems
but
like then why legislate this
just look-
process at
just
all?
as criteria
If we're
to look at,
trusting.
Criteria.
it's up to them.
Yes.
What about a new system?
If it's a new system. Right. What I think what Charlie is pointing out is expansion of an existing system is a criteria and it could be good in a certain circumstances. He's also saying another criteria you should look at proximity to a designated area.
It would be dividing number two. So it would be whether the project is an expansion of an existing system as one criteria, then number three would then become proximity to a designated area. That
But
would,
it's saying expansion of an existing.
it's better taking it into
Or
consideration.
cutting,
So if you're taking that into consideration, you also have to take into consideration if it's new. It's just how they.
Oh, that just is,
Yes, it's either an expansion or it's new, but it's almost duplicative if you say if it's an expansion and if it's new. That's my understanding.
in other words, I think basically one criteria is whether it's an expansion of an existing system. That may make it, for example, wiser to invest because it's just to get more bang for your buck, you're pyramiding off an existing system. Another is for anyone, whether it's new or expansion, is it near a designated area? And I think that's probably more important for new, but it could be important for either way. So I would recommend just dividing two into two different criteria. How do people feel about
Or
that?
can you just, or is it not an or? Is
It's,
It is an or,
well,
I think it's
it's
more.
two different criteria.
right?
so it's not an or, it's just, we're just listing criteria, because that's my question is, would we not just change the and to
We
or?
could,
Like, does it make more sense to, what's the difference? Hold on, give me a
yeah.
minute,
what's
it's
the
coming.
difference?
What's the difference if we change the word and to or if we separate the two, does that read the same? No.
So what you're suggesting, what I'm hearing, whether the project is the creation of a new or expansion of an existing system and the proximity,
No.
is that your?
So whether the project is an expansion of an existing system, yeah, or the
Or
proximity.
the creation of a
But
new,
we don't have to put the or there. We will put it at the very end. Look at 4. 4 says the ranking.
The ranking.
And then it ends with and. If you put and at the end, if you have a list of 5 things, 6 things, and you put and in the second to last one, it implies that you have to, they all have to be considered. If you put or, you could only consider.
Well, that's what I'm, so that's what I'm
any-
asking. Are we making a list
Yeah.
that are all to be considered?
Yeah.
Is it or, is it an or? So
No,
it's not an or.
No, it's at the moment, it's
Okay.
and, it's just a list of everything you consider.
Okay, so it's not an, okay, thank you.
How do people feel about dividing those two and having a criteria that says proximity to a designated area?
Sure.
Yeah.
Find how everyone wants to go.
Okay, now, on the issue of whether we leave the index in,
Can I,
yes,
I'm so sorry, I have to step out, but I just want to make sure that we have language in there that Michael had suggested, about providing dynamic flexibility for interfund loans.
yes, we have to do that. Okay.
Good catch.
Yes, okay.
I just have
You have
a
a
question.
Yes.
Wasn't Michael supposed to send us something about state
Yeah, he
revolving
was.
funds?
I don't, has he? No, not yet.
Michael,
God, we have the time. I think it's the, ask. I believe, and am I correct? It is the sense of the committee that Michael made a successful case that he needs a little language, giving them the ability, interfund transferability. And could I ask you to remind him that you need language and to get it?
More than happy.
Okay, we have time, unfortunately, but we have time because we have not heard from the Environment Committee and because the current schedule of the committee, the Commerce Committee, the current schedule of the Commerce Committee is they're not going to get us anything till late next week. But going back to this community index. Okay, what are people's pleasure? I have to say, I don't like the index, but we have one proposal to just leave it in. We have a proposal to make a successor. Add successor, I would put consideration in just because so that they, soften it. That's what I mean. But it's up to you guys. I don't have strong feeling.
What if we just don't mention the index at all and we just say consideration of the relative need and capacity of the community? They use the index, it's up to them. Or they use something else and maybe they find is more, but just giving consideration to the factors that this is supposed to address.
I like that, but I don't know how do people feel about it.
Since you said we had time, would we be able to ask the head of the agency that comes out of? What their plans are for the
Doug
future?
Farnham. Yeah, Doug will tell you it's a wonderful index, but sure. I just disagree with it.
Well, I just,
But yeah,
he says we did it once and we're done with it, and I don't foresee us going
okay,
forward. with it.
we can get, people want to get Doug in here?
Sure.
Doug Farnham. Okay, we'll get Doug in here.
Thank you.
All right. The only
And
other,
remember what, and someone remember what Tom's suggestion was, I probably, I memories for. I was
I
gonna,
think Tom's suggestion was great, but he won't forget it.
I will,
He's gonna write it down right now.
okay.
Just think of why the index was created.
I'm with Tom. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I gotta write it down now.
I like it too, I just don't wanna forget it.
Okay.
He does have another thing, which is as part of the plan, the application, he suggested that the applicable RPC is provided a letter affirming conformance with the applicable regional plan. Do you want to do that or not?
Nope.
We have one, no.
That would be my suggestion. I feel like we've pushed a lot of regional, I don't want to say the word that I'd like to.
Well, you have said previously that you think the RPCs can be a little heavy-handed.
They can, I think we're pushing a lot of ability to be more of a top-down organization of their towns. That a lot of towns feel is necessary. There's a lot of work and a lot of community engagement that goes into town plans. It's constantly going 24/7. If anyone gets all the emails from their planning commissions about what the town should look like, how it goes forward. And the idea that there's not gonna be a lot of work put into, should we do an expansion of our water and sewer system? And the town doesn't know best, they should get the okay from the regional planning commission, seems a bit much for me.
Other feelings?
I'm with Joe.
I think the community should be able to ask if they want it.
Yep.
It's available, but.
Okay, I think we're gonna leave that alone. I will add, I don't quite know enough to have a strong opinion on the subject, but I do have a general concern that pervades all of this, that I want to make sure that rural Vermont, I want to try to provide capacities for rural Vermont. And I think that, I'm afraid that even the new version that we will get of the tax increment financing will be sufficiently complicated that it's hard for small towns to deal with. I'm concerned that, no matter how we try in good faith to simplify it, I'm concerned that even if we do have tax abatement or tax stabilization, might be a little hard, but in any case, the bond thing is attractive because the bond bank is used to working with small towns. They do it. They know how to do it. And I don't want to do anything that would impede that continuing. So that's why I guess I'm a little skeptical of this addition, and I understand, but I think it's the sense of the committee, we're not going to take that up now, right?
Be mine.
That's what I'm seeing nods. Okay. So in terms of drafting, we're going to hold off on room on 4, what's currently 4. We're going to separate 2 into 2. And I think
He has one more recommendation.
what is that?
It's on C, so just if you
Where?
have his thing up, it's this subsection C here where he comments. Perhaps, so this is the sentence, however, perhaps.
Where are you?
It's leather.
His letter.
And so we start with the word however. Perhaps the number of housing units served should also be a criteria. I'm not
C
asking. you to
is-
ask, I'm just mentioning it.
This is C of,
This is his letter.
No, that's his letter. It's not in there.
So it's talking about under F, under the list, under
Criteria.
all the criteria on page
Okay,
11 or 12, 10. He's saying to add.
Sure, per cost. I mean, if they're making the whole, either extending a system for 4 households, that's not the same as extending.
Also assume that if you give priority to number of units served, you're going to then give priority to
Big developments.
larger developments in larger areas.
Yep.
That's a
And it kind
large
of,
assumption on my part, but
it kind of goes against number 1, the very first criteria,
Yeah.
which is regional housing targets. Like, if that should be, that's sort of the trying to make sure that this is answering everybody's. I don't think we should have.
what's the sense of the committee on this? I'm seeing,
I'm trying to find his suggested language on that.
it's in his language,
First page of his
on
letter.
the first page of his letter, he just says, he doesn't have,
Note that the criteria
Oh,
for F.
it's
so
based
if
on the
you-
organization. Yeah, no,
Next thing I'll be about it.
uh,
I can see it being.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think also,
This is better.
I mean, I'm sure
It's
without.
better, yeah, it's
It's better
better for
for-
more
For
urban,
where I live,
bigger.
I think though that,
which is why he wants it.
yeah, well, that's why he wants it. Yeah,
Well, I-
Well, I mean.
Not necessarily, I'm not saying
It
that.
could be like if you're looking at it, but if you're looking at if you're looking at two small villages and you've got a 2-bedroom unit or a 3-bedroom, and then you've got a 20 unit or a 10 unit in another small village, then would it make more sense to work on?
I think that he's gonna be looking, no matter what we say, whether we go with this or we don't. I'm sure he will ask himself, does this make sense in light of the number of units? And if it's a small investment, he'll go for it. If it's a, huge investment to support 2 units, he won't. But I kind of go with the people who don't want to put this in.
Yeah, I think
Because I
one
feel
addresses
like-
it.
This particular financing device, I don't want to bias it because I think this one is the one that's gonna work for small towns.
Well, I'm not gonna, for the whole, like, whatever.
You're not gonna represent your.
No, I am, I'm saying, but I'm also understanding of the committee and the democratic process.
Okay.
Well,
I think that number one, F1 says, does this show demonstrable progress toward regional targets? Obviously, the more units, the closer you get to your regional target, that's already being favored. No?
Yes.
Go Cameron, I saw your eyes and I was like.
So what I think is what you're hearing from the committee is as we further work on this draft, we'll hold off on the ranking. We will divide number 2 into 2. We'll leave it an and at the end. We won't take up the issue in its seat. It's not gonna take that up.
And then add the language from Mr. Gahn about.
Yeah, we really want interfund transfers, yeah.
That's very good.
Can't have it all.
All right, is there? There were other proposals, and I know Michael has some for the work on the tax income and financing, but that's not.
Sorry, we haven't engaged.
Okay, well, I think we're done, and I think we're done for the day, Natalie.
Today.
We're done for the day, except for the floor. All right?